you for joining Anne's Art Desk. These videos are brought to you by the City of Palo Alto and the Palo Alto Art Center Foundation.
There we go. It's better. I mean, one of the first compositional choices you make is what is the outside dimensions of my artwork. And if I wanted to send this to Bay Nature or to Audubon magazine or something like that, or to a gardening magazine, then I would want to choose this kind of a format, and I would want it to be in this orientation, right? And, you know, if I wanted to post something to Instagram and do a piece of artwork for Instagram, then I would make it a square format. So that's sort of your first choice that you get to make. And I kind of love that choice. And then I have all these little pieces that I'm going to use later to do my layout. But in the meantime, I thought we would just talk a little bit about composition because it's fun. And something you can do to sort of play along if you want this to be active instead of just listening is make some boxes like this. They can all be rectangles or squares or uprights. Some people love to work in this format, which is fine. So something that's sort of interesting in terms of how humans think visually, I'm going to use a bigger pen so you can see, is that we have something called the golden mean or the golden rectangle. And this is probably something you're like, yeah, I know this. But there are sort of interest points that humans like at the thirds, at the third intersections, essentially. So I divided it into thirds, and then these places are where we tend to think something interesting ought to be happening. If you are drawing sort of, like here's your most basic, most boring composition, is that. It's half and half, and there are no thirds called up. There it is, the most boring composition. Oh wait, that's the second most boring composition. This is the most boring composition. Notice how the upright brings a sense of dynamics to this that this lacks. And you don't have to think boring, you can also think peaceful. Peaceful would be nice. So there are some things that you can, you know, that go both ways. You can think of a composition that's like this as being really angry or fractionated or divisive. But what it also is dynamic. You know, it could also be angry. Like whatever expressions you feel when you look at this thing. You know, as soon as I start drawing these into trees and I decide this is a beautiful Sierran mountain, all of a sudden, rather than angry, you see dynamic. Right? So cross lines like this tend to show movement, unsettledness, instability. And then lines that go across like this tend to show sort of peace and calm. So that's just sort of a little bit about lines. That's pretty basic. If you love this stuff, I can post some books about composition. If you have any of the books I've suggested, like Terry Dodson or the Sierra Club Guide to Sketching in Nature, there are pages about composition in almost every drawing book you encounter. So something that humans really don't enjoy looking at, that we don't feel is dynamic, we don't like half and half. We don't like 50-50. We love thirds. So when you're making a composition, you might want to think about this kind of a ratio, 70-30. And what's interesting about this, it's really cool, is that the 70-30 or the 80-20 or the 90-10, this doesn't have to be light and dark, right? That's what you're seeing on my page. Dark. But that's not necessarily the ratio of things that you have to use. You can use light and dark, but you can also use, what are some other things? Um, Warm and cool, or busy and calm, or sparkly and plain. All those things are perfectly reasonable things to use to divide your picture up. And I think some of the cleverest paintings use several of those at once. Like Sargent is really good at doing that. And Rembrandt is really good at doing that. So if you look at paintings, you'll start seeing that we really do like these sort of off-kilter, skewed compositions. The 50-50 we find really quite plain and boring. But look how easy it is to make this into an interesting composition just by doing something like that. And all I've done is tilted it toward the dark off the 50-50 mark. I've made some interesting shapes, and now it's a little composition. The same thing for this. Oh, that's kind of cool. What's going on there? So you can pretty quickly, something that's interesting about this is it's really crying out for a little dot of white right about there. So yeah, that is a very, very basic intro to this stuff. This is all based on Fibonacci numbers and on sort of the Greco-Roman tradition of dividing squares up into these shapes. Let's see if I can do this. I can never do this on the fly. I don't know. That wasn't right. But you can get the beautiful spiral if you do it right. Something like that. I once drew it freehand and it worked out great. You see this pattern in nature a lot in pine cones. Yeah, I'm going to keep a note. Post fib number video, because you will love it. There's a woman who does these really great math lessons online, and she looks into it all for you. So let's make this one into an interesting composition, right? This is the kind of thing where, I don't know if you've studied design thinking, but rapid iteration is a big principle. So when I teach people composition, I say that most of your paintings fail in the first 60 to 30 seconds, and they fail for compositional reasons. So if you learn about composition and you're willing to do quick little sketches, your final pictures and paintings are going to come out so much better, because those little errors you make early in your early in the design process, you have to pay for a long time thereafter. So you might want to consider that this is a very powerful method of having all these little tiny boxes and just playing around with what's the composition going to look like. Is there a way to make this an interesting space? And I'm really working very abstractly. Most people who are abstract painters have a very strong ability to think abstractly and to design shapes and spaces. Maybe this one is in 3 tones, so I have kind of that. Let's do a few more. So you can also do this too here. Like if you divide this into thirds, you have the exact same situation that you have here. These are equal. It's just one is oval and one is square. It doesn't matter. So you would have something happen here, here, or here. Notice that that's true for this. Like if I draw thirds through this, something's happening there, something's happening there, something's happening there. That's pretty blurry. I'll do it a few more times so you get to see. I'm going to put that piece of paper aside and do it over here. because these are really scrappy, sketchy little things. So what if we did a few more just for fun? And you can play with this at your own leisure as I'm talking, or just watch or whatever. But they're all fun, and they're all fun to do. So something you might even think about is this might be a good time. Like if I'm going to do a vertical drawing of my birds and submit it to a magazine, I'm going to need a vertical format. I can actually think about, like, how would I lay out my piece of paper? I'd want a text box up here. I can even put a little T in it. And then I have a plan to do some drawings that are about what soil looks like. So soil profiles. And then I'm going to have a little area where a lot of other animals appear. So centipedes, beetles. So I can actually lay this out and I think, well, that's pretty klutzy. What if my bird were down here? And all the information is sort of located more up here. And then I have a kind of a little rogues gallery of bugs you find on the ground. That might be better. Or maybe it all has to be smaller and the bird is this big. Here are some bugs. Here's some text. And here are my soil profiles. That might be better. So in this little layout, you can kind of start to see very quickly how thinking about these things ahead of time is really help. You can also just like go over your thinking and think about what makes a good abstract design. This one's almost looking Mondrian-ish. There we go. So again, this is 60-40 or 70-30. But you can also skew it to the light. It doesn't have to be dark, and just to have a very high key picture where it's the lights that are doing something interesting instead of the darks. It's a little bit about sort of composing. Let me turn it back this way because I have something else to show you. There are a lot of very classic composition sketches and ideas that people use a lot. So here's one. You guys will probably recognize these from your knowledge of art history. Like, you know what painting this is already, I bet. Yeah, it's Monet. And this has a really interesting design. Because rather than being, you know how the classic landscape, this is sort of like how, what's the guy on TV did? Yeah, Bob Ross. He always had a very sort of journey structure. So he'd have a road going into the distance and some mountains and a weight here to kind of even it out, and something over here maybe, and maybe something here. And your idea here is that you go through the picture, right? This one, you also go through the picture, but in a different way. You literally go into it, like this. I love this. You call this a through composition. Not around, but through. You know, and this is sort of what I think of as a journey structure. We are guiding the viewer's eye to what you want them to see, and then how to leave the painting. And often this S curve is something that you see in paintings a lot. Yeah, can't spell while talking and drawing. So those are two, but there are many, many more. Something that I love is there's this one, which is very stable, very peaceful. So this can be a big, beautiful mountain, like maybe it's Shasta or Mount Fuji or something. Maybe there's something here that brings you into the mountain. But it really is this big triangle. You can also base a painting on sort of a circle effect, like this, where you have maybe some small mountains and then some clouds. And you can also say that this is sort of another way to do a through painting, because you're being invited to go in to it in that kind of a sense. Wow, spontaneous block drawing of arrows. I think I'm a fool, but anyway, something like that. So there are all these different ones. One of my favorite ones, and one of the ones you probably see in sketchbooks a lot, is called a balance composition. And there are also upside down ones and whatever. But you see this a lot, where there's a heavy weight here and then a lightweight over here. And what you're meant to assume is that it's essentially like a fulcrum system. So the farther out you put that lightweight, the closer in this should be, right? If you like this kind of thinking, Edgar Payne is your guy. He wrote a wonderful book about this. It's out of print, so be careful not to buy the one that's $300. Buy the one that's $40. There's a reprint that's $40, but if you wanted the original, it would set you back about $300. So just be careful when you're out looking for it, because you can get into trouble. I think his granddaughter reprinted it, and that's the $40 one. But if you're seeing something that's $300 or $400, that's because it's actually from 1850 or whenever he published it. His writing is terrible, but what's valuable about this book is he goes into all these little ideas kind of at a really deep level, and it's sort of fun to look at the pictures. It's essentially a picture book with a lot of bad writing in it. So the other thing you can do is also have an upside down steelyard, right? Edgar Payne does this a lot. He usually does it with boats, with the boats reflected in the water. That's kind of a neat composition. I like that one. So this is like the surface of the water, and then all this is water. Let's see. Yeah, I like the steelyard compositions. Notice that things are off kilter by thirds, are a little bit over or a little bit under, which also means that you can break things down into the golden triangle, rectangle. Same thing here. Something happening there, something happening there, something happening there. It's actually really interesting, and it's really hard to teach online. I feel like you guys are being very patient with me at this point. Does anyone have questions? Yeah? Okay. Something that is kind of important if you're thinking about abstraction. There are sort of two ways that modern painters paint. One is called non-objective. You guys can think of, and the other is called abstract. So abstract relies on a sense of design and often leads to something we call figurative art. Now, figurative doesn't necessarily mean the figure, it just means that you can potentially recognize something in the picture. So, you know, like an abstracted figure, but it's not realistically painted. So like, you know, and by figurative, when people say figurative art, they simply mean we can recognize a subject in this painting. They don't mean necessarily figures. It can be a barn, a sky, whatever, but you're just like, there's some basis in reality or in observation or just some sense of design. Non-objective art is like Jackson Pollock. Sorry. And Cy Twombly, where you're just seeing color fields. You know, Jackson is just really doing this. And it's not meant to have, the point of it is not that it has a design sense. The point is that it doesn't have a design sense, that we've left that behind. We've grown beyond it. We have transcended whatever. They're both equally wonderful ways of painting. I love them both. So just to have a sense of, like, when you're looking at paintings, think to yourself, is this non-objective or is it abstract? It's kind of a fun way to think about things. I noticed when I was researching this for another student that the Guggenheim, I think it's the Guggenheim, I'll post it, has a really wonderful overview of their own collections and also of like art movements. Like, here are examples of this art movement, here are examples of this art movement, and the history behind them and things like that. I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, I got a question about the non-objective versus
Yeah.
abstract. Are you saying that all drawing and painting, they fall in one or the other?
No, I'm saying that you should just be aware that you can go either direction, right?
Okay.
Um,
And abstract, if we're
yeah.
going abstract, we're going more towards something representational. Seems
Yeah,
counterintuitive.
it does seem counterintuitive. So abstract is like representational art, where you start breaking the picture plane, simplifying the shapes, riffing on the design, riffing on the colors, instead of just doing your very best to make it look like what you're drawing.
Okay, so it's not completely abstract.
No, no, it's more like, well, I think that a lot of people, when they think of abstract art, they're actually thinking about non-objective art, which is why I mention it
I was
here.
thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's actually a difference there that I consider pretty important. And if you want to be an abstract artist, I often get asked, do I have to learn to draw to be an abstract artist? And yes, you do, because it is design based. And you have to know how to design and how to compose to be an abstract artist. You may not have to know how to draw, but you do have to know how to compose and design and think visually. So I once met a woman who was trying to be a color artist without any color sense. Like she was an artist who had no color vision. And I always wondered what she did with that, because there's so much art you can make that's just light and dark. You don't have to be a colorist. But I do know that there's one successful artist back east who has no color sense, and his paintings are really colorful and really beautiful. And he's somehow figured out how to make a good painting without a color sense. And I don't mean he doesn't have a color sense. He has no color vision, like he does not perceive color. He obviously has a color sense because he makes really colorful, beautiful paintings, but without the being able to see it. I don't know. I'm not sure how that works. So that's my thoughts on that's a pretty crunchy, fast composition thing. And essentially, you all are design people. You're all art people. You all have really good design skills. And you probably have a sense when you rearrange your living room or plant your garden or just make a newsletter or write a letter, that you have a sense of how things ought to look. And when they look right, they sort of make a harmonious sound inside your head. You know that feeling, right? You're all there. I've noticed there are some people who just don't have it. Like they cannot imagine things in space, or they cannot design anything. It's interesting to meet such people and try to explain to them why something should be this way or that way, because they really don't understand what you're talking about, because they don't have it. So let's see. Here's my so now I'm actually getting to the meat of the matter here. We actually need to start thinking about what is the final drawing going to look like. And this is sort of interesting because if I were to send this to a magazine, the format of this nice big page should be more like that. Yeah?
You know what? I think there's some people who are muted because I can hear someone's
Yeah.
radio.
Yeah. Let me have a look.
If everybody could mute.
Do you want me to mute everybody? That seems a little...
Yeah, I think that's easier, isn't it?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I can. I actually can't.
Oh, we can all make sure we've muted ourselves.
Yeah. Let's see. I see people starting to mute themselves, so... yeah. Okay, we seem to have muted the radio. Thank you, everyone. Okay. All right. It's funny, you do this with third graders and they all start yelling at each other about who is and isn't muted, which is fascinating. So something that is kind of interesting about this drawing is essentially for the size of paper I've used, my main drawing is too big, right? It's a nice drawing, but it's too big. So this is where sort of rapid iteration can be so helpful. Like, I actually like this layout of these two birds, and using them that size would give me the right space. So just so you know where the edge of my picture is, let's just draw it. Because it's hard to see over the camera because the paper is white and the background is white. So here's the edge of there's my format. So something you can do with all the sketches you've made is think about how do you lay out a page that makes sense. And this is kind of the design thinking rapid iteration part of this. I'm going to put my little bits away. And something I found is I bought this really beautiful book, The Law's Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling. And he has a beautiful page on composition. Again, these pages would be in any drawing book you opened. And they pretty much go over what I just went over. But then what he does on the next page is he actually talks about how to lay out essentially what we're doing now, which is a finished page. So what he did is he went out into the field and he did all these little sketches of a hawk. And then he started thinking about, well, how could I develop these sketches into a finished page? And so that's kind of what we're doing right now. I thought it was a really nice little lesson he had put there. And he says here, create a mosaic of page elements with some of them together and some of them free. So here's my main person, essentially, those two together. And I kind of want to put them up here. And something that's kind of fun is you can make little elements that you can then move around. Like this. So you can think about where you want to put your text box or whatever you're going to use next. So I have a plan. I haven't done the drawings yet, but I have a plan to make some studies of what these animals eat and where they live. So I have this other thing I want to add to my picture, and this is a box about what am I going to put here? Oh, I'm going to do 2 drawings of soil, and I'm just going to have them next to each other. And one of them is going to be mulch and no mulch. So something like that. So see how we're sort of building the page we want to make? And then kind of, I actually brought these things to my desk, which I hope you guys don't mind. But I brought some creatures to my desk. Is anybody super squeamish? Because I have this really cute little guy. What's funny about this fellow? Here we go. He's going to stop running in a minute. He's a little centipede. And something that I've noticed is that wherever there's ground cover, you have all these extra animals. And you should think of this guy as, he's like a shark. He's a top level predator in the ecosystem in which he lives. So he eats other bugs. He's not a detritus eater or anything. He's literally hunting. So something that I was thinking of doing is making a lot of little drawings about all the bugs that I find once I mulch my garden. And there's also another creature that shows up in my garden, and that's a blue-bellied fence lizard. So I have this really cute little lizard. And I tend to think he's a good indication that my garden is healthy. So he can go there too. So as soon as you have all these elements, you can start laying them out. So here's this guy. And he's got these long things. And then he has lots and lots and lots of legs. And centipede. So as I start building up my little set of essentially rough drafts, then I can lay them out in a way that makes sense. Does that make sense, guys? So it's sort of a cut and paste project. This is the kind of thing you might do to make a finished drawing. I also find these really beautiful little black beetles. Something like that. I don't think I got that quite right. So here's my little gallery. You guys still with me?
Yeah, this is Jeannie. I have a question about the composition as it relates to what you're doing. Do you consciously think about composition as you're moving these things around, or is it just sort of ingrained in your?
No, I do totally literally think about the composition. And something, once I have enough little pieces I can show you, like, so you have some basic stuff, right? So there's going to be a little picture here, and maybe there's a little plant, but there's also a whole bunch of duff on the surface. And then underneath, there's a lot of water, and there's a lot of creatures. And there are lots of creatures right here under the duff. I found a lot of pill bugs. So maybe there needs to be a picture of a pill bug. So literally what happens here is I think I want all these elements on my picture. So here's the no mulch option. And essentially the soil has no horizon lines in it. So what I'm trying to show is when you add the mulch, you get much more than without the mulch. And you also have very dry soil here. And sort of yucky little weeds. So you kind of have all these elements, and what you can do now, which is kind of cool, is like, you're like, okay, so what if we tried something completely different? What if we wanted something more like this? Does that work better? With our little rogues gallery down here. Maybe this overlaps a little bit, which I think is pretty cool, because that gives me a little more space. And then I put my benthic organisms down here where they actually are benthic. What about something like that? And this arrangement gives me more room, like right here, to have text. Blah, 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 text. Like that. So I get to say the story in words too. What do you guys think of that? Better? But
So
you could.
you're not thinking about the thirds, it's half and half.
I actually am.
Okay.
I am thinking about that stuff. And I'm also sort of thinking about that feeling when your living room is arranged just right. Or, you know, the card you drew it feels good. Like, how does it feel good? You'll notice that these are not right in the middle, right? They're offset. I've weighted them a little bit. They're big elements and they want to dominate the picture. It's also possible that as I continue to research this is actually not a story about towies, it's a story about mulch. And so then the picture starts looking like this, right? And then maybe I have one towie who's sort of, where could this towie be? And he becomes like just another sort of creature you find in a mulched garden instead of the hero of the story, which I actually think that may be where this is going. So that, and even I would probably start doing things like making this mulch picture bigger, right? So now I sort of feel like we're getting somewhere. And then I think, so this sort of rapid iteration, I bring it up because if you do want to spend 30 hours on a illustration, this kind of rapid iteration is going to help you not waste your time. So text, text, text. And then this might actually say sheet mulching. Instead of spotted towie. You know, which kind of shifts the actual scientific message, but also may tell the story better. Any questions about that?
Yeah, Anna had a quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a quick question, Anna. Sorry.
Yeah.
When you talk about composition, how much of the color plays a part of the composition?
Well, something we can totally do is just wipe away the sheet mulching idea. And instead, I'll just use this as an example. I love color. And one of the ways, I mean, I would do all of these sketches in some kind of a color system. But something you could do is just be like, I'm going to do a nature story about this Towie, and just make it about a bird. Maybe his partner is here. But look how weird it looks that the partner is facing the same way. Here. And again, with the whole like... So if you think in terms of composition, just tracing it through the piece of paper. If you think in terms of composition, you know the 70-30 thing I was talking about? You also want to do that where you have accent colors like the red eye or the rufous sides, and then you have sort of calm other colors that sort of push the painting around in a way that makes sense to you. So we can actually like have them both standing on the same branch potentially, which would be kind of cool, like that. And then maybe down here there's some like, I don't know, where you find their nest, what their eggs look like. You could do a little portrait of their eggs. You could do a picture of what a fledgling looks like. I have crow fledglings in my front yard right now. You could do a portrait just like what the nest looks like and where it tends to be located. That kind of thing. So you can keep adding information to just about anything. Let's see, you can write down the sort of cadence of their song, like this, drink your tea, and then you can write down the little mnemonic you use to remember it. So you can add all sorts of information to these nature sketches, but notice that he's not like right there in the middle. That's a lot more boring. I mean, just having him here and then something else going on here is sort of a more interesting scenario. I really like the female pointing the other way much better. Say that she goes a bit like that. So,
I have a question about the bug. Is he going back into the garden?
This guy? Oh yeah. Yeah, you're like, wait, he's just suffering there. No, I have these nice little habitats sitting here for them.
Oh, good.
When they're not
Looks
just...
like he wanted to go somewhere.
Yeah, he sure does. And I give them little lids as well, so that they're not traumatized by the light. Yeah, I've noticed I have a slightly different attitude toward the natural world than a lot of people do. But I'm not freaked out by bugs, and I also consider them very worthy inhabitants of my garden. So I like having them out there. I'll put him back. He serves a vital role in my vegetable garden. So you can then think about whether this is just the Towie. So the original question is, what's with the color? And when I'm thinking about color, I also think about, is it warm or cool? Is it 70% warm and 30% cool? Is it 30% blue and 70% red? You know, like I try to run those contrasts off of each other as well. Something that you should be careful of with any sort of nature drawing is you'll need a scale bar. Just because you're changing the sizes of things an awful lot. So you want to tell your viewer something about that. Up here in your text, you might want to say Towies are about 6 inches long, just so you have a sense here of how big this is. Let's see. What else can we say about these things? Oh my gosh, I've been talking for 50 minutes already. Does anyone have questions?
Yes, Anne?
Yeah.
This is Sue. I'm wondering, when you start putting all these bits and pieces together in your composition, what do you do about the background? In other words, does the background unite them? Do you keep it distinct, or how do you do it?
I leave it white, or when I'm designing this kind of page, I should have actually pulled out a bunch of my pages, like finished pages I have. Let's see, often I've noticed that people sort of vignette. So he's telling you about a kookaburra, where a kookaburra lives, by doing, actually a kingfisher, sorry, by showing you this little bit of background. If you look at the pages other people make, like here, he's carefully drawn this kite, but he's just left the background just a suggestion of light. There's nothing really there. You know, some things, like if you're doing a portrait of a flower, it's fairly traditional, like in the tradition of botanical illustration, to leave the background white. Let's see what else we can find. I tend to want to put in a little bit of habitat. Wow, this book really like hits all of the markers. And something you can often do is put a little vignetted landscape behind something. And that could actually be, you know, I could actually draw a little drawing of my garden. Here's my, you know, a little garden bed I have out there that's filled with veggies, but it also has a trellis on it. And on the trellis, I often see this little bird sitting. So I actually show the bird in its habitat. I have lots of bushes, and usually the female is like down here somewhere. So I actually show where they are in their habitat, but maybe that's a little vignette shape. So it kind of depends on what you want to relay. If you want to relay where this animal lives, you're going to have to show some habitat. Like here, if you think about it, he showed you the habitat. He shows you that this bird is often standing in water. That's not much, but it says something. And this one is often in the reeds. So you don't really have to go over and above. Like this one's standing on a dry branch. It's very typical of it. This is clever. Let's see if I can find some more habitat pieces. He is like an exhaustive teacher. It's fun to practice these little habitat sketches, essentially, the little landscapes. And the design teaching I've done today is really conducive to going out and doing a few landscape sketches and seeing if you can apply those principles to a sketch. Something I can erase this later. But notice that if we divide this up, we have the exact same phenomenon happening, where the points of interest are at the thirds. And you can also, I mean, you can just keep doing it. Do it over here too. The points of interest are at the thirds. It's a very classic way to look at the world. It literally is classical, as in Greco-Roman architecture. So you may want to think about it. I've painted this picture too. It's funny because this is sort of a different scenario, right? This is a portrait and not a landscape. It's a picture of this thing. But notice that he breaks up his horizon line happens at the third. See what else he does. Oh, this cloud is occupying this third, but not these 2/3. This little shape here is occupying this third. Yeah. So he's still using it even though he's drawing a portrait, essentially. It's kind of fun to sort of... Yeah?
So, Anne, could you remind me the name of this book?
Oh, yeah, this book is sort of... To my mind, it's sort of too much. The Lost Guide to Nature Journaling and Drawing. Mr. Laws is... John Muir Laws. He has the most wonderful name for the profession he has. He's a local nature drawing teacher. You can study with him. He does wonderful work. I wonder if his parents knew who he was going to turn out to be, or if he turned out to be who he is because he has that name. And then this one also has equally good things, but this one is out of print. So it says new edition, but this is an out of print new edition. And I love everything she has to say as well. This was actually my first drawing book that I ever truly engaged with as a kid. Like I had a copy of it when I was a teenager. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on laying out a nature story. Think about what your message is. Like if your message is the habits of Towies, then this is probably the drawing you're going to want to make. If the message is, maybe it should even be like that. Maybe like, I don't know, but see how quickly you can start fiddling? You know, and you all have a good design sense, so you all have a sense of how do things look. it's sort of easier to see, like, maybe that's better than that. I mean, she is often scoofing about on the ground looking for food, and he is often sitting up on a perch telling other people to go away. So, yeah, you have to think about how it would go, and then make your composition. Maybe even like that. I don't know. I kind of like this because that would give you lots of space to do other things over here. But notice that he's not like smack in the middle. Okay, I'm going to stop fiddling because that must be annoying to look at. So then if I wanted to change my entire scene over to this idea of mulch, no mulch, then I would lay it out more like this, with like my little creatures who show up when you mulch a garden. And maybe this picture gets a lot bigger. So because I'm a little bonkers, I actually went into my garden, and this is a cross section of my sheet mulched garden. I don't know if you guys think this is funny or not, but I sheet mulched it. So this is the cardboard I laid down, and then I added all this stuff to the top of it, and it's actually worked really well. So I would probably actually take this and draw pictures of it. You can see that it used to have turf in it because turf comes with this plastic junk everywhere. It's kind of micro trash extraordinaire. So I thought that was pretty interesting to just have a cross section to go draw. So let's see, does anyone have composition questions? Are you all happily drawing?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you asked for us to draw composition in the assignment yesterday or the day before, whenever you assigned that, that was intended for a composition for a nature drawing?
Yeah, but if you are, I have several students who are not taking this class for nature drawing, they're taking it for skills. So if you wish to apply your composition knowledge to some other field of art, I have no problem with that. You can submit to my classroom whatever you want. The homeworks are really intended as a kind prompt. They're not intended to be, you're required to do this. If you don't need a prompt, if you have your own ideas, please just tell me what your idea behind your artwork was, and so that I can respond to the idea. You can also just follow the homework as written. And the homework that I entered yesterday is actually meant for next week. So last week's homework was go out and field sketch. You know, collect a bunch of resources, drawings that might be a part of your final story. And then this week's homework is kind of take all those resources and sketches and drawings and make a rough layout of how you would actually draw them. You can use the original sketches in the final if you want, but something that's really fun to do, and I actually laid this stuff out before I started. Where did I put it? I don't know if you guys have tracing paper or if you know about tracing paper, but tracing paper is fairly awesome. And let me just show you for a minute here. You can also use a window or a light table. But something that happens quite quickly is, one thing I like to do is start with the back piece of paper, not the front one. Sorry, I've got to turn it over. So there's my bird. And if I start with this first piece of tracing paper, something I can do is do a really nice draft of my bird. And decide where the lines are going to be. If I'm doing it in pen and ink, I may actually want to think about the line strokes and the line weights. But tracing paper is just this marvelous tool for rapid iteration. And then when you get a final drawing, and you can keep on doing this, like, where did my other little bird go? Like, say I really wanted this bird in there as well. I can just put it in and decide where I'm going to place it, and then add her to my drawing. And she's behind. She has all these cute little worms. And she'll have a tail over here too. So see how if I take my original sources away, I now have a drawing that is much closer to my final. Because I've placed them both in the position I might want them. Actually, don't think I would want them in this position, but here they are. And there they are, sort of working together. One thing you should do when you're drawing something behind something else is do what we call drawing through. So you don't have this problem of the back is here and the tail is here. That's not right. So I just draw off the back of her wing, and then I can erase her bit there, but then it's right. So you do this idea of drawing through when you're layering things over each other. So there they are. And so now see how I'm very rapidly creating a final drawing, just because I can just flap another sheet over. And now what I could do is decide I'm going to do this in pen, and I can put all the proper pen marks in. And just make it a much prettier drawing. I know that pen and ink drafts people who work hard on making their line weights and their line directions and line sizes actually rehearse the drawing like this. So this is not the final, this is the rehearsal. And they'll actually think about where each stroke goes. So it's kind of interesting. And then you can just keep on adding a new sheet of tracing paper to the top. So, we went from these two not being together to having them together to starting to think about what the ink drawing would be like.
So then,
yeah.
You take the tracing paper and then visually you just reproduce it onto your...
Yeah. Or there's actually... You don't have to. You can hold it up to a window. The other thing you can do, which is really quite nice, is you make yourself a piece of carbon transfer paper. Like this. And say I wanted to put this drawing onto here without a light table, without anything. What I would do is I turn my carbon transfer paper upside down, graphite side down, and then I very carefully go over the lines with anything pointy. And this is a really nice way to transfer drawings. You may prefer the window and the piece of tape, but you can do it this way too. So then, ta-da! It doesn't come out very dark, and it probably shouldn't come out very dark, but you can then have a pretty good sense of what your original drawing was like, because you get this little carbon transfer. Oh, I pressed the paper down with my fingertip, and I got that little smudge. You generally have to go back over transfer drawings. It's just sort of part of life.
Do you do that with landscapes too?
No, I don't. The way I plein air paint and the way I paint in general, I do a lot of the things you saw early in this lecture. Let me see if I can pull them back up again. Where I do a lot of blocks and sketches and squares. So I'll do a lot of this kind of planning. But this sort of cut and paste method I'm showing you, and the transfer and the drawing, is much more typical of making science illustrations or sketchbook pages or sort of story illustrations that are trying to teach somebody something, because you just have too many moving parts. But when I'm out plein air sketching, plein air painting, I will very often do something like this just with my brush on my canvas. Like, okay, let's see, I'm at Point Lobos, and the mountains go a bit like that. I'm going to need an element here to kind of push your eye back in. These things are dark because the sun is sort of out there. Maybe the sun's over here. There are really distant mountains, and the Bird Rock is out here. And that's literally how I'll design these things when I'm out. That's actually not a bad composition. I wish I was in Point Lobos. So notice that this one also follows the thirds. Right there, right there, right there, right there. So I do this kind of thing a lot, and I do it also for, say I was doing a still life. I think a lot about how my still lifes are going to go. And I think about whether that's a good composition. And where the light comes from. So composition, just the basic box compositions are so strong, because literally whenever you do a piece of art, you make most of the decisions right here in the first 10 to 30 seconds. And say you spend 20 hours on something, better not have problems here in the first 20 or 30 seconds. Better to just spend a few minutes thinking about how it ought to be. Because you could totally draw this drawing the wrong way, right? Same drawing. This is actually something I see landscape artists do a lot, where they're kind of shy of the space. And they're like, yeah, okay, there. But if this just overlaps that, it's already better. If you cut off most of the sky, which is fairly useless, it's already better. And if you put a heavy weight here, you don't have this like falling off the side of the picture problem. So composition is super fun to play with. I love it. I love doing it. But you could also have the exact same composition. You guys see that? With these really low coastal mountains, bird rock. Maybe something is happening here just to keep you from going over that way. And then this. And then maybe what's actually going on in this picture is this big, beautiful cloud structure. But if you're going to have a big empty space in your picture, there better be a reason why, or your picture is going to look boring. I tend to have fairly dynamic compositions, but there's actually, the opposite of boring is calm or peaceful. And we depending on which of those you fall into, you're going to find, here's something that some people would say is boring. And here's something some people would say, oh, I want to be there. I want to be those people. That's my idea of paradise. So, it's easy to be judgmental and say that's boring, but you also can just look at things from another way. Any questions about that?
Please log in to my Google Classroom. The login code is SP26DRM, Sierra, Papa, number 2, number 6, Delta, Radio, Mike. Thank you for joining Anne's Art Desk. These videos are brought to you by the City of Palo Alto and the Palo Alto Art Center Foundation.